Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your hosts Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. Today, it's just me, John Keir, hosting a solo episode talking about Steelers and Bills. It is currently 11:26 Eastern Standard Time in Western New York, where I am recording, and we're talking about the Steelers and Bills, who are kicking off later tonight in what could be a potential playoff preview. Not going to spend a ton of time rehashing a ton of things that I'm sure Austin talked about in his solo episode earlier, but there were a few things that I kind of wanted to go over before the outset of this game. Just talking about why I think the Steelers have a better chance than I think most people do when it comes to this game. Now, there are a lot of factors that are kind of making the general population and even myself think that the Steelers are going to have a harder time winning this game than maybe a couple weeks ago. But there's several things to consider. Number one, I really want to start with this, is that the fact that the Steelers lost last week to the Washington football team, I think that was huge for the Steelers because, you can talk about how mad Mike Tomlin was after the win over the Ravens, and you can talk about all these things that the team's trying to do to improve. The only thing perfect about us is our record, blah, blah, blah. That's fine and dandy to say, but it's human nature to not necessarily take the action you need to take until you've suffered a loss like this. And the Steelers have had several bad games, like the Dallas game, and like the Washington game, and like the second Baltimore game. There have been issues with this team where they've been winning, but it's like, yeah, well, they haven't been playing their best ball, and I do get that. So, all that taken for what it's worth, I understand why the trend lately for the Steelers has not been very good. But I'm going to get into why I still like their chances, and first and foremost, I'll start with the fact that because they lost and because they had 6 days to prepare for this game today, I think that it bodes better. Their chances bode a little bit better because now there's a little more gravitas behind the voice of we need to improve on things. There are things that we need to do better in order to win games. So I think that for those reasons, you're going to see the Steelers come out playing a little bit better in this game than they have in recent weeks, and I like their chances better because of that. And for that reason, it wouldn't matter. To me, I'm just talking in terms of the Steelers on their own. I'm not talking about anything that has to do with the Bills. I'm just speaking just in terms of the fact that they had been dodging a loss for a few weeks. They finally got it. Now the message can be more easily received and transmitted, and therefore used in practice to hopefully hone in on some things that this team had been struggling with, like drops, for instance. So I feel better about that from that standpoint. Let's talk about my buddy Justin, who I had on the show. We're gonna play the audio of his interview that we did last night, talking about the Steelers and Bills. Justin, I think, provided a lot of fantastic information. I love having him on the show. So I think that not going to rehash a ton of things, but I'm going to play the interview here for you and let his analysis of the Bills kind of speak for itself, and then I will circle back to the Steelers' perspective, talk about a few things, and then should be able to wrap things up pretty quickly. So thank you, and I'll be right back post-interview. All right, welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. John Keir and Austin Davidson hosting, and right now we want to bring in a special guest of the podcast, has been on before, most recently last year, previewing the Steelers and Bills matchup for the second time. He's a good friend of mine back from our days at 89.1 The Point in Brockport. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show my good friend Justin Maybach. Justin, how are you doing, my man?
Pretty good. Looking forward to an exciting matchup this weekend.
Yeah, so Steelers and Bills, a game that had a lot of playoff implications last season as they met in Week 15. This year they're meeting in Week 14, and you've got two teams at the top of the AFC picture right now, excluding Kansas City. The Steelers sitting at 11-1, and the Bills at 9-3, and having just a very narrow loss to the Cardinals under their belt, could easily be 10-2 at this point as well. So when talking about the Buffalo Bills, a team that's made the playoffs 2 out of the last 3 seasons, they've had one of the biggest reasons for that has been their quarterback play and taking that extra step this year with Josh Allen. And last year he played well at times, not great at other times. This year it's been basically, just to sum it up, a breakout season, hasn't it?
It has been a breakout season, and was definitely nice to see is that in the beginning of the season, he threw for 300 yards. Jets, first time he had thrown for over 300 yards in his career. And then next week against Miami, he goes over 400 yards. And right out the gate, even without the offseason training program and a preseason this year, like what we get in every other NFL season, the passing game immediately looks better. And Allen comes out of the gate looking like an MVP candidate, which I was not at all, but it was definitely welcome sight.
So with that being the case, what do you think you attribute that to mostly? Do you think it's the consistency and stability that's been seen through the coaching staff? Not a lot of changes there with Brian Dable and obviously head coach, Sean McDermott. I don't know why I was blanking on his name. And, of course, you add in a new weapon like Stephon Diggs. All of a sudden, this offense, had some nice pieces last year, but, I would imagine that you would say consistency between the coaching staff and then adding a weapon like Diggs has been the biggest reasons for Allen's continued breakout.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. The addition of Diggs changed the dynamic of the passing offense, and we even have a rookie wide receiver who's been coming along nicely in Gabriel Davis, and usually you don't see rookie wide receivers develop very well in Buffalo, but I think the whole dynamic of the passing offense with Stephon Diggs, John Brown, Cole Beasley in the slot, and even Gabe Davis making an impact when he can, it's really nice to see. Then they also have Isaiah Mckenzie, who they use every so often, and it's a welcome sight, and especially considering the fact that John Brown is on IR for at least this next game, and then maybe he comes off of it the following week. But the fact that the passing offense hasn't really suffered too much since he left is very nice to see, and it's definitely a testament to their depth and their coaching staff all around.
Indeed. And Davis is actually someone that I kind of wanted to highlight too, because like you mentioned, with John Brown out and on IR for the time being, a guy like Gabriel Davis would have to step up, and he has, at least certainly the last 2 weeks. He's had a touchdown in each of the last 2 weeks. A guy that probably gets lost in the shuffle when you talk about all the great wide receivers that have come out of the draft over the past couple of years. Guys like Justin Jefferson and Chase Claypool, to name just a couple. Guys like Davis might get lost in the fray, but he's been very impressive in his own right, and I think that it's important to highlight him going forward. As far as the Bills' pass game goes, we know that they're an explosive, deep down the field attack. The running game, which kind of powered this offense last year, how is that doing this season?
Well, to put it in perspective, it hasn't been anything like last year, in a good way and a bad way. Now, it's in a good way because the Bills have become a pass-first team, basically, with the exception of the game against New England this year in Week 8, where the weather was miserable and passing wasn't necessarily going to be good for either team. And it actually, England, I feel, more than it catered to Buffalo, because Buffalo had to adjust and go run first just for that week. They did enough to hold off New England. Devin Singletary in his year isn't necessarily as dominant as last year. And Dak Moss, the rookie that they drafted in the 3rd round out of Utah, has been in and out of the lineup. He missed about 4 to 6 weeks of footing, and then when he came back, he started to make an impact with that New England game when he had 2 rushing touchdowns, although in the Monday night game against San Francisco, twice lost a fumble and then pretty much was benched the rest of the game. And Single did all the work on the ground. And then they also have Yeldon, TJ Yeldon that is, but he plays on rare occasion that both of them aren't available. And it's good depth in that area, but essentially the Bills don't necessarily need their running game going all the time. I mean, they'll need it as a supplement to the pass. There have been times when the running backs really haven't been able to get any ground going, but when they can, it is and as long as they can keep the ball, not turn it over, then I can appreciate any running. And you don't get Josh Allen.
Yeah, that seems like the biggest problem with your offense. Like, your offense is really, really good all around, but the one thing I would point out is that the fumbles is huge. 9 fumbles from the year, I believe. I'm sure they're not all from running, but I figure most of them are. But are you concerned about the turnovers? Because that's like one bad thing. Your team is really good all around. You guys get the turnovers on defense. You guys have a really good passing offense, which is important in this league. The turnover differential, I honestly just found the stats today. I honestly thought you guys were doing better because I was like, Josh Allen's playing at such a high level. I knew he wasn't throwing any interceptions. I mean, there's none in the year, but that's not a lot. I was surprised to find that you guys had 9 fumbles. Are you concerned about that?
It does concern me when they face a defense that can bring the heat, like Pitt's defense. San Francisco wasn't able to generate a ton of pressure on Allen this past week, and that was a big reason why he had a big game. Now, with Pittsburgh, I'm worried that Josh Allen will not be able to recognize pressure coming from his blind side. That makes me worry that he could lose the ball easily, because one thing I've noticed with Allen is he really doesn't protect the ball well, either when scrambling for yards or in the pocket when he does see a defender coming from behind. The running backs, I think it's just not holding on to the ball well enough. It's not so much they're getting it stripped, but the turnovers do worry me. The fumbling worries me, regardless of whether or not they lose it. And they have been losing the ball, so it definitely would be concerning if it'd be coming up on Sunday night.
And one of the aspects of Josh Allen and the Bills' offense and their explosiveness, as you might be able to surmise, is the fact that they hit the ball, get these deep shots down the field. A lot of it is Josh Allen extending the play, and that's going to require him to hold on to the football. And if I'm the Steelers' defense, I'm focusing on trying to take away Stephon Diggs if I can. I'm trying to put pressure on Allen without having to blitz as much as I can. A group of players on the Buffalo Bills that I think is kind of maybe not forgotten, but maybe a little underrated in the general sense, is probably the tight end group. There's 3 solid tight ends with this group, and Dawson Knox, Tyler Croft, and Lee Smith. I know Knox has been hurt most of the year, but he had a solid rookie season last year. The Steelers should be familiar with Croft from his work with the Cincinnati Bengals over the past few seasons. And Lee Smith, the guy just doesn't go away. He's one of the best blocking tight ends in the league. And I know Austin would agree with me that when it comes to the Steelers' ground game, we've really struggled running the ball, and we'd love to have a guy like Lee Smith right about now. So I was curious if you could tell us a little bit about the tight end group and their impact on the Buffalo Bills so far.
Well, if there's one thing I'll say, it's that Dawson Knox has looked better the last 2 games, because up until the Chargers game, he really hadn't made as much of an impact. Whenever he was given opportunity, he would have to drop the ball when it was thrown his way, or he would fumble, or he would miss blocks, and it was getting to the point where fans were getting fed up with him and calling him a bust. And I think that there's still potential with Knox. I feel like he's just going through some growing pains, even as a second-year guy, and everybody wants to see all the skill players making an impact the minute that they're in the lineup, and I think Knox, it's taking a little bit more time. Tyler Croft, I've been impressed with, although he hasn't been playing as of lately. They've been playing Lee Smith was actually inactive for a good amount of games this year, and I believe that's a testament the coaching staff's ability to recognize key matchups and where players are going to do better in certain areas, and having Lee Smith in the blocking scenarios is definitely helpful. So I trust that the coaching staff, when one tight end is active over another, then it's because they have the capability of recognizing better matchups in that instance.
So looking at the other side of the ball, while the Bills' offense has broken out and has become one of the better units in the NFL in an offensive-driven league, the defense, which had been improving for years and was honestly a top 5, if not a top 3 unit last season, fell back to the pack. They had a really rough start to the year. They've kind of rebounded a little bit here lately, so maybe around the middle of the pack right now, statistically speaking. What happened to this Buffalo Bills defensive unit, and can you explain why they struggled so much early?
I think I can give a lot of reasons as far as why it hasn't been as good of a year for the defense. So first of all, they lost one of their backers in Lorenzo Alexander to retirement. That was not related to COVID at all. That was just because he had made this decision before the end of the regular season last year. The Bills knew that he would be leaving after the 2019 season. They lost Starley, one of them in the line, to an opt. They lost a potential depth cornerback in EJ Bain, who had been in and off the roster over the last few years, played mainly in 2017. They intended on bringing him back in 2019, but he got injured in the preseason. The season was lost. He opted out. Might have been a good depth piece. But then also losing your edge rusher and Shaq Moss in Miami. You lose Jordan Phillips to the Cardinals. Both were free agent losses. So the loss of all those guys definitely made an impact. I would say that because the offenses that they're playing are much better than what they saw last year, because guys know to necessarily target in the direction of Tre'Davious White. That's why you haven't seen him making necessarily as many big plays as last year, because now quarterbacks know not to throw in his direction and to go target for Trey White. Mainly, it's just a combination of, and also there's been injuries as well. There was a week where the Bills lost Levi Wallace and Josh Norman due to COVID-19 related reasons, and they did rely on University of Pittsburgh, Dane Jackson, that week and against the Jets earlier in the year, and he had a good impression of himself. What I will say about the defense is that they are good situationally. They have the most fourth quarter takeaways in the league this year, and they know when to make the plays. They aren't as dynamic when it comes to trying to score. Like, they actually have a drought that dates back to 2017 as far as when the last time the Bills scored was.
Oh wow!
Jeez, that's a really long time. Was that against New York Jets?
That was actually against the New England Patriots. Jordan Poyer, who had a pick six of Tom Brady. Jordan Poyer is still there, and it was the same defense that McDermott and Leslie Frazier were coaching. It's just for whatever reason the Bills get takeaways usually in the opposing team red zone, so they'll get at alt drives right as other teams are looking to go and score. And Tre'Davious White has come close. And Matt Milano tried last week against San Francisco, but they never seem to get that lane and all that blocking to get in. Meanwhile, I've seen the Steelers do it seemingly week after week, like Minka Fitzpatrick, Joe Hayden. Like it seems easy for them.
Yeah, that's
used to be rare. It really used to feel rare when we had Artie Burns and stuff. It felt like that stuff never happened. It's so weird now because of where we're at. It's just touch on what you said. It's kind of crazy because your offense is the exact opposite. I was watching the Bills game last week, 2 weeks ago, and they're jinxing Josh Allen on live air, and they said he hasn't thrown a red zone interception yet. And so awesome that you guys, your defense is one of the best at taking away in the red zone, and then your offense just doesn't turn it over. That's a recipe for winning.
Yeah, I would agree. And the fact he still has yet to throw zone engine is pretty awesome to know about. Like, I mean, there's all these statistics with Josh Allen that really come off as pretty phenomenal. Like the fact he still hasn't thrown a red zone interception, the fact that he's up there top quarterbacks as far as fourth quarter game-winning drives and comebacks in general. The fact that, you know, he is being compared as it is right now to a younger Big Ben is something that he's taken a lot of pride in, and it's something that if that really is to be true, you know, then for a very good career. Of course, obviously, it would be nice to maintain this high consistency as far as his top performances are concerned on a week-to-week basis, because you go to some of his bad teams this year and they looked pretty bad, and it's like, can we just get, you know, that was playing at an MVP level earlier in the season and then within this past week or so.
Could you like kind of like lean in for us and kind of like just whisper to us, you know, what's the worst part of this Buffalo Bills defense? What is, you know, if you're looking at for the Steelers as far as what they're looking at, what do you think is the part of the defense that the Steelers are going to look at and say, in order for us to win, this is what we have to attack on Sunday?
Well, mainly the weakest part of the defense this year has been stopping the run. And I read that against the Chiefs back in October, they gave up over 200 yards run to their rookie Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And against San Francisco last week with all of their weapons, I thought that was going to be a big issue, but they actually did a decent job for what it's worth. They don't necessarily stack the box, but
you know,
have been better at addressing the run but overall this year, run has definitely been weaker than pass defense. And if the Steelers want to try and attack the Bills, then they're going to need to get the run game going with Connor and Snell. And I know that as of lately, that's been an issue. Team just hasn't really bothered to try running as much as passing.
Yeah, it's
interesting.
You know, it sounds to me like it's a matchup of the resistible force and the movable object. So, I mean, I'm curious, how's Ed Oliver playing? That was a guy coming out that got comparisons, not like exactly to Aaron Donald, but he was kind of a similar build, a guy that scouts seemed to think was going to be the real deal. And he's not putting up eye-popping stats, but, I mean, he's not, as far as I can tell, he's not a bad player. I mean, how is Ed Oliver? Is he lived up to the hype so far, or is he disappointed a little? Or is he somewhere in between?
I would honestly say somewhere in between. I mean, his name isn't going to be the one that pops up like Aaron Donald. I mean, granted, let's be honest. No, like Aaron Donald is probably like just better than the next best guy at his position. I mean,
he's on another stratosphere right now. I mean, it's just him and then everyone else.
Yeah, I think honestly, Ed Oliver's impact on the defense right now is probably in an area that you won't hear about as much. But I mean, obviously, he is. It's only the second year with the team. I honestly wouldn't be giving up on him right away. I mean, every once in a while he'll make that big play, but year hasn't necessarily been as eye-popping, and I think that the defense will try. I think that the defensive coaching staff will try and work with him to address whatever issues he may have. But for what it's worth, I mean, if he can start making more big plays, I would say that the investment of a top draft pick in him was worth it in the end, but we'll see. I mean, time will tell.
So
the 49ers game, he had a nice take on. He was blocked by two guys, and he was able to get penetration. So definitely he can perform at a really high level. He can definitely live up to his, I believe, 14 overall, right? 14?
I believe it was 8th or 9th.
8th or 9th. That's a little bit too high. Too low.
He was drafted right before the Steelers drafted Devin Bush.
Oh, so pick
okay.
number 9.
Yeah.
Pick number 9 then.
Yeah, so he's definitely can lived up to it. He showed in that 49ers game, I saw that, and Baldy did a breakdown on it. That's why I really know about it. But I think that Ed Oliver can definitely be a guy that lives up to that overall pick potential. Since I've seen it before.
Absolutely. And they also have a promising young rookie in A.J. Epinesa that has been in and out of the lineup, but has made an impact at times when given. I like what I see from him as well.
Complete side note, I didn't realize Jerry Hughes had been in the league. This is his 11th season now. I mean, wow. I feel like he's still a young guy, but he's been there a long time now.
That's correct. He has been with the team since 2013. The only other guy on the roster that has been with the Bills other than the current regime of Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane would be Jerry Hughes and Reed Ferguson.
Huh. That's definitely not a name I would have figured, but that's go figure, I guess.
Yeah.
I forgot. John Feliciano is he's been dealing with injuries all year. I know he was limited earlier this week, but it looks like he should be back. Bills' offensive line, real quick. Where's this unit as a whole this year?
Yeah. Losing Cody Ford been? Has the guy behind him stepped up? I honestly would love to hear about that because who's starting at left tackle tackle now that Cody Ford is out.
Yeah, so the offensive line this year has been kind of interesting, to say the least. Not necessarily that, but it hasn't necessarily been what the coaching staff intended for. Hard to believe the coaching staff intended for a starting offensive line that hasn't played together as a unit all season and actually will not get the chance because right before Cody Ford was set, he suffered injury in practice that took him out the rest of the year.
Ooh.
So as an offensive, their idea of an offensive line this year consisted of Deion Dawkins, John Feliciano, Mitch Morse, Darrell Williams, and Cody Ford. Of course, that never all came together. But also on the offensive line, who they brought over from the New York Jets, who was initially signed because of the initial injury that John Feliciano had that took him out the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season. Cody Ford made a good of himself last year as a rookie, so he had been earning more playing time. It's unfortunate, but now he's down for the Ike Bucker is another guy that they mix in every so often. They had Quentin Spain, who was not necessarily playing that well earlier in the year, so they moved on from him. On the offensive line, I'm a big fan of Morris when he's healthy and not dealing with another issue. And Feliciano, honestly, I think when he returned against New England in Week 8, you really saw the impact the running game had with him in the lineup. And I know he got hurt again pretty not this game, but I don't think it's an injury that will keep him out this weekend against Birds. With him playing the offensive line, it looks completely different. And even though they won't get their ideal offensive line together one time this year, I think it's definitely something that Bills fans can agree much more what we had in 2019 and before that.
So I got one last general question here. With Tre'Davious White, who I have made no secret about over the last few years, he was one of my favorite players coming out of the draft in 2017. I think he's had a really great career thus far. Has, according to PFF, given up 4 touchdowns this year, but is still grading really well. He's had some tough assignments with guys like DeAndre Hopkins and DK Metcalf and Tyreek Hill. So it hasn't been an easy season for him. So maybe that's understandable. So I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he's still a shutdown guy. So I guess my question to you, Justin, is do you think that the Bills are going to try to travel him against one of the Steelers receivers, or do you think that they're just going to have him stay on one side and whoever he goes up against will just shut it down?
I could see them doing the travel option or potentially moving him around, but probably going to be based on what they're seeing in the Steelers from the get-go tomorrow night. What I will say is the Steelers wide receiver core definitely looks better than what the Bills went up against last year. against the Steelers in Pittsburgh when they didn't have Claypool yet, and Juju Smith hurt for that game. So they were going up mainly against Washington and Deontay Johnson. And then also I noticed that the Steelers have been utilizing Ray McCloud a lot, not necessarily in the receiving game, but as a punt returner and initially with Buffalo.
Yeah, one that's interesting that you mentioned that the former Bill Ray McCloud. He's been utilized a little bit on offense. One thing that they had been using him for, he had a long, 60-yard run against the Philadelphia Eagles earlier this season. That's one aspect of the Steelers' offense, motion, jet sweep, stuff like that they ran early in the year, but they have not run late. So I wonder if we'll see a little bit more of that, but I wonder for the time being. Any further questions, Austin?
I think I'm pretty good.
Alrighty then, Justin. A couple things here to close out. Number one, can you give us one particular matchup, whether it's receiver versus cornerback or a group of linebackers versus running backs, or is it a third down offense versus third down defense? What's one thing that you're looking forward to, one matchup you're looking forward to in this game?
Well, good question, because honestly, I think that there are a couple good matchups to point out. But if I had to pick one, it would probably be based off of what the cornerbacks and safeties for the Steelers try to do to contain Stephon Diggs, whether or not they put one specific guy on him. I think the game is a little bit rough because of losing Joe Hayden, and obviously there's not as much of a to the pass rush because of Bud Dupree being out for the year, which is unfortunate. But I would basically be most interested in the matchup regarding Zion.
Alrighty then. And then to close out, Justin, could you please give us, kind of your brief rundown of thoughts about this game going into it, just kind of how you think both teams are going to do and what you ultimately think the final score will be?
Well, definitely wish that the Steelers were still undefeated heading into this game, because hard to believe that the last time the Bills had a home Sunday night game was against the New England Patriots in 2007 when they ended up going 16-0, and I know that's something that a lot of Steelers fans wish could have happened. Obviously, it didn't get to that point, and unfortunately the Washington football team had to come in and beat Pittsburgh before that game. But now that actually makes me a little bit about how the Steelers will approach this game now, knowing that they are well enough to win games all the time every week. They don't feel as invincible as they probably felt before losing to Washington. But still, this is going to be an exciting matchup. I mean, I was reading about how it's the first Sunday night matchup like this with the two teams playing each other have combined winning percentage this high in December or January ever, basically, because the combined record would come down to 20-4 or 22-4, if I have that correct. 20-4, I think. Ultimately, I feel like the Steelers haven't had adversity this year as the Bills, basically because of their easier schedule that they have playing the NFC East and the NFC South. So I will take the Bills in a very close game. My score prediction would be 28-24. I don't think the Bills get over 30 points like they did last week. And I hope that the Steelers will make it challenging and be surprised if it comes down to the final few minutes. And unlike last year, I do not see the Bills coming close to scoring a defensive touchdown, because I remember predicting whatever pick six. I actually was almost correct, but I think that make it close. I think they can come out on top, not by a lot, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Pittsburgh gets back in the win column.
Should be a lot of fun, and yeah, I think you're right, Justin. I think that this game has a lot more of a chance to end up as a higher scoring shootout as opposed to last year's game, which was I believe a 17-10 game. You might be able to confirm or deny that for me.
Nope, that's correct. 17-10 was the final score, and the Bills struggled offensively, but to get 4 picks from Duck Hodges.
Doc, oh man, good times. But no, it should be a lot of fun, and I'm glad that the Steelers and Bills get a chance to play for the second time in as many years. In fact, going back since they've realigned the divisions, the Steelers and Bills have not played more than once every 3 years because of the way the schedules line up, and because of the fact that the Steelers and Bills never finished in the same spot in their division. So they've only played just a handful of times. In fact, the last time they played in Buffalo was a game that Austin and I actually attended, the game where Le'Veon Bell had a massive day. Weird to think how much has changed since that time, but it should be a lot of fun. And Justin, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us again. And to be quite honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the first of maybe 2 times we have you on the show, because I certainly would not be surprised if these 2 teams met up in the playoffs later this year.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised either, but they're guaranteed to play next year regardless if they each win their divisions again, and then they would play again in 2022 based on the fact that the entire of the AFC North. I will say both of those games would actually take place in Buffalo, and I know that it's a to the game this year because of the coronavirus pandemic. I was really looking forward to being able to be at that game, but next year, as long as they play each other again, and somehow if fans were able to go some capacity next year, which I think there's a good chance that could happen, it would be nice if we could definitely out.
Absolutely. I was actually just thinking about that too. Like, man, if all this wasn't happening, I'd probably be at the game tomorrow. But such is the life we are currently living in right now. Hopefully we don't have to go too much longer with the things as they are. But in the meantime, Justin, thank you so much for joining us. And if anyone wants to get out there and see Justin's thoughts, I don't know how often you tweet, Justin. I know you do sometimes, but you want to give our anyone listening your Twitter handle if you want any of our followers to check out and see what you're thinking about the game?
My Twitter at Justin Maybach 24.
Alrighty. Well, Justin, until next time, thank you for joining us on the Stronger Than Steel podcast, and enjoy the game tomorrow.
Thank you. Same to both of you.
Enjoy, man. Thanks for coming on.
All right, take care, buddy.
Yep, pleasure. Thanks. Goodbye.
Alrighty, thank you, Justin, for joining us on the podcast. And now I wanted to get a chance to talk a little bit about this Steelers and Bills game from my perspective, and kind of my thoughts about just in general about why I feel good about the Steelers' chances in this one. Let's start first with the fact that they did lose and they haven't played great lately, but the fact of the matter is this is a really great organization, and historically great organizations will bounce back. And even though they hadn't been playing well lately, again, as I mentioned before I had the interview put on here, we were talking about how the Steelers losing is actually good for them, and it gives Mike Tomlin a chance to have his message heard a little bit more clearly going forward. So I like that. And when I talk about great organizations, the Buffalo Bills have been an organization. You know, I've grown up in Western New York. I've seen the Bills play for a long time through some really inept years where they struggled to find the right players, the right quarterback, the right coaches. I think that they finally found the right answer at GM, coach, and quarterback, and that gives me hope for them going forward. But you know, sometimes you have to go through you have to stumble over some blocks as you're rising to the top, as the Steelers did when they were going through their rise to power from the early 70s. They lost some playoff games in 1972 and 73. The Bills likewise have lost 2 playoff games. They're on an ascension. I don't doubt that, and I think that they still have a chance to be a really great organization going forward, but I still think that they are a little bit a ways from that. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll finally make that, they'll ascend to that level where they're hoping to get to a little bit sooner. So, now, as far as the Steelers go and why I'm talking about great organizations and them bouncing back, I wanted to call several games in the past decade back to memory where the Steelers were coming off a bad loss or a string of bad losses and were not favored to win the next game they played in, but they either won or they dominated. Just to show you, so going back to 2012, the Steelers had lost 2 straight games without Ben Roethlisberger. They were going into Baltimore, a team that was going to later on win the Super Bowl with their third-string quarterback, Charlie Batch, a week after they had turned the ball over 8 times and lost in Cleveland. The Ravens were favored by over a touchdown in that game. The Steelers won, and Charlie Batch outdueled eventual Super Bowl MVP Joe Flacco in that game. The Steelers had a very effective game overall. They turned the ball over 3 times, but they were able to control the ball on the ground, and they did enough through the air. Charlie Batch in his final start with 276 passing yards. The Steelers bounced back in a game that no one thought they were going to win. Let's fast forward to 2014. The Steelers were coming off of a game where they lost to the New Orleans Saints after a bye week, 35-32 in a game that really wasn't as close as the score indicated. The Steelers were facing an 8-3-1 Bengals team, and at 7-5, the Steelers needed to win in order to keep pace in the division. They fell behind in that game, 21-17 at the end of the third quarter, and they were 3-point underdogs on the road, and then the Steelers unleashed an assault over the final quarter, 25 straight points that ended with a Steelers 42-21 victory over the Bengals. The Steelers never looked back, winning their last 3 regular season games when few thought that they would beat the Bengals that day. Let's fast forward to 2017. The Steelers have just lost to the Jaguars 30-9. It looked like the Steelers were in trouble. Ben Roethlisberger had thrown 5 interceptions the week before. Austin will remember this game. The Steelers, we watched this game at a Buffalo Wild Wings out in Long Island, and the Steelers, who entered the game at 3.5-point underdogs, the Chiefs were, I think, the last unbeaten team in the NFL at this point. The Steelers really controlled the game, at least early on. The Chiefs only ran the ball for 28 yards. They had, I think, in total, less than 250 yards of offense. The Steelers had over 400. And the game came down to a critical situation because the Steelers couldn't score touchdowns, but they were up in that game 12-3 at one point. The Chiefs made a game of it, and then a big play from Antonio Brown gave the Steelers a 19-10 and later a 19-13 victory. And the Steelers didn't play their best ball, but a week after being doubted and saying, oh, maybe Ben's over the hill, the Steelers played really well and beat the last unbeaten team in the NFL, another game where no one thought they were going to win. And then 2 years ago, we should remember this one well, the Steelers had lost 3 straight games, including most recently to the really bad Oakland Raiders, a game where Ben Roethlisberger got hurt and Josh Dobbs threw an interception. Fast forward the next week, the Steelers are playing the team that will eventually win the Super Bowl in the New England Patriots. The Steelers are 7-5-1. Patriots are at 9-4 and seem to be streaking towards what could be another deep playoff run. No one thought the Steelers were really going to win this game. The Patriots were only favored by 2.5, but I know that us in Pittsburgh, we were thinking it was going to be bad stuff because the Patriots always beat the Steelers. And the Steelers go right down the field, score an opening drive touchdown. The Patriots answer with a broken play touchdown where there was a busted coverage. But besides that one play, the Patriots could only muster 3 points of offense the entire day. The Steelers weren't great offensively, but they did put up 17 points on the day. And overall, the Steelers kept the Patriots in check on the day. Tom Brady threw an interception to Joe Hayden. Another game the Steelers were probably supposed to lose, but they were able to bounce back because that's what great organizations do. And even though right now they're at a low point because they lost their first game, let's not freak out here. This is still a really good team, and they have the potential to play better now because they lost last week, because that message should be heard. So I just wanted to start with that. That's a big point I wanted to make. And now in terms of the X's and O's, let's be honest, the Buffalo Bills have a a great vertical passing offense with Josh Allen that Justin touched on. He's dynamic. That's That's just a fact. So the Bills are going to be able to move the football in this game. The key is going to be, number one, on defense. You want to be able to get pressure with 4 or 5. You want to contain Josh Allen in that pocket. I think that even with Alex Highsmith in favor of Bud Dupree, I like the Steelers' chances of putting on pressure in this game. Josh Allen likes to hold on to the ball. You just have to be able to not let him break contain and make sure you can kind of close in the pocket. I know that mobile quarterbacks have given the Steelers trouble, but I still feel good about the Steelers' ability to get pressure with those elite pass rushers. And because the Bills are going to be able to move the ball, you're going to have to be able to keep them out of the end zone in the red when they enter the red zone. And, that's going to be really the key there. Keep everything in front of you. Don't let a guy like Stephon Diggs kill you. The Steelers did a good job with Terry McLaurin on the outside last week. Only 2 catches for 14 yards. They should be able to put Steven Nelson on Stephon Diggs, and then just be careful with guys like Cole Beasley, Dawson Knox, and obviously the running backs, Devin Singletary, and of course Gabriel Davis deep too. So the Bills have a lot of weapons, but the one I'm most concerned about is a guy like Stephon Diggs. The matchup I'm most concerned about on defense is the Steelers' depth at inside linebacker being tested. It's going to be Avery Williamson against guys like Singletary or Dawson Knox. It's a little concerning. See if you can avoid that, but it might be unavoidable at times, so be on the lookout for that. Like I said, the Bills' offense is very good. They should be able to move the ball, but get pressure. Stiffen up in the red zone. And the last thing I want to note is that Josh Allen has been prone to mistakes throughout his career. He always makes a couple plays a game where it's like, didn't expect him to do that. That was kind of crazy. So the Steelers' defense is one that typically capitalizes on these types of mistakes. I'd expect them to in this one as well. One other thing to look out for, Josh Allen is great as a runner in short yardage with quarterback sneaks and designed runs. He's very good at that, so I think the Steelers are hopefully going to be on the lookout for that, but he should be able to convert a lot. If Tom Brady is the captain of quarterback sneaks, and that means Josh Allen is the first officer of quarterback sneaks. Flipping to the other side now, the Bills' defense has had kind of a strange drop-off comparatively to where they were last season. Their run defense in particular has been awful. They lost guys like Jordan Phillips. Their defensive line is kind of small now. This game of any, the Steelers have to be able to run the ball successfully. And I was talking about this with Austin. I think you might actually have to waste some downs trying to establish it and commit to it. Joe Thomas was talking about the Steelers' ground game. He says that the Steelers aren't practicing it. I don't know that I agree with that, but I agree with him from the standpoint of it's not being emphasized during the game, and the Steelers are just dropping back and throwing. If the reports are true that Roethlisberger's knee is bothering him, I don't see why you shouldn't try to run the ball a little bit more, certainly in short yardage situations. And I'm not big on running the ball 30 times a game just to run it 30 times a game. But I think this is a game where you want to see the Steelers try to establish the run. They haven't been a physical offensive line, but the Bills' defensive line is small. You can push them around. And I think that with James Conner and Marquise Pouncey back, I think that will help. And frankly, I think it's just about a mentality thing. The Steelers should come in pissed off. They should anyways. And I would hope that this offensive line comes out with something to prove. And I hope that they come out with the purpose and they push the Bills around early on, get that ground game established, and then let the passing game take over from there. If you run successfully early, it will help you run successfully late. And don't be afraid to use motion, too. The Steelers have kind of gotten away from that. I want to see more of that because I think it's not something you should use all the time, but if you use it 10, 15 plays a game, I think it can really help your offense, and I just don't think there's any reason not to do it. I want to see more play action. I want to see more deep shots taken, too. I want to lead off by saying that the Bills' defense has had a tough time tackling this season, and the short passing game should probably work in this one. The Bills like to blitz their DBs, but that doesn't really concern me as much because I think Ben can diagnose that pretty well. So the short passing game might actually work in this one, but I don't think that means the Steelers shouldn't throw the ball deep and that Ben shouldn't hold on to the ball a little bit more in this one. Run some more play action, run more under center. These are all changes that I've been wanting the Steelers to make for weeks, but they haven't been doing it because they've been winning. At least that's what I think. And maybe they're still stubborn and they won't still do it. But I think that is the path to possibly doing things a little bit better, helping yourself in the process. Also, when it comes to running the ball, you don't need to pack it in because that hasn't been working for Pittsburgh either. I think you start by spreading it out, doing the numbers game. If the Bills have the safeties crawled up, then take your shots. And if they're back and you have a favorable numbers game, it's that simple. Just run the ball, try to get downhill, and try to take advantage of that small defensive line. I think that there is an opportunity for explosive plays from the catch and run and for the deep pass game. Now, you have to be careful with the deep pass game because these safeties, Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, are very talented. But depending on the way the Bills play, if they're going to sit back in zone coverage and try to allow the Steelers to take what they can underneath, which most teams have this year, I am okay with the short passing game. But as soon as they start getting a little more aggressive like Washington was and Baltimore was the week before, that's when you have to take your shots. And I know that Ben doesn't really want to hold on to the ball right now, but worst case scenario, if the Steelers do end up going to the Super Bowl and they have to do it the long way, they only have 8 more games. I know Ben is getting older, but this is the time to hang on to the football and make a play. So I want to see him do that a little bit more than he has so far this season. This offense, the biggest issue is it's not generating explosive plays outside of the running game. I mean, it's not generating explosive plays. And in order to do that, sometimes you're going to have to hold on to the ball and make a play. And I think against this defense, you can do that. I really feel good about the Steelers' opportunities for moving the ball in this game. And I know that lately they haven't played well, but I think that we're going to see a different team out there Sunday night. So with that in mind, we're about an hour away from Sunday afternoon kickoff, so let me get into my picks this week. I'll get them real quick. Not a ton to say about them, just trying to wrap this one up now. Texans at Bears. I like the Texans in this one. The Bears defense should give Deshaun Watson problems as he's without weapons now, but I just still can't trust the Bears offense. Cowboys at Bengals. I like the Cowboys. I know both teams have been really disappointing, but the Andy Dalton revenge factor is the one working in favor here for me. I like Dallas to lay 3 points. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned Houston was -2, so I'm going to take the Texans -2 as well. Chiefs are at Miami Dolphins. This is interesting. Kansas City's getting a touchdown favorite on the road. I think I'd stick with Kansas City, but one thing to mention is that the toughest games that Patrick Mahomes has played throughout his career have come against the New England Patriots defense, and Brian Flores runs that same type of defense. So I actually like the Dolphins as the underdog here, +7. I don't know if they'll win, but I think that they might be able to keep this one close. This is a big game for Tua Tagovailoa. Cardinals at Giants. Arizona is a 2.5-point road favorite. I was thinking about taking them, but I'm going to end up taking the Giants +2.5 here. I believe Daniel Jones is going to be back for this one. Vikings at Buccaneers. Tampa Bay is getting a touchdown at home. I like them to win this one. They got a bye week to potentially work out some of the issues that they've been having. And Minnesota's just been kind of a strange team this year. This should be a tough defensive team for Dalvin Cook to get yards on. Broncos at Panthers. Pretty boring game. Carolina's getting 3.5 at home. I'll take Carolina with the points. Titans at Jaguars. I don't see how you can't take the Titans. They're favored by only a touchdown. I know it's a divisional game, but Derrick Henry tends to have his best games against the Jaguars. This could be a blowout. Into the late window, Colts at Raiders, two teams scrambling to get one of the wild cards. The Raiders seem to be in trouble. I like the Colts as field goal favorites on the road. Jets at Seahawks. Seattle's a 15-point favorite at home. I'll take them. Why not? This would be a game that you'd hope Russell Wilson could get back on track, but the Seahawks have been kind of skidding their tires lately. I think that they should be able to get back on track here, though. Packers at Lions. Packers are 8.5-point favorites on the road. I like them in this one. They should be able to put up a ton of points on Detroit. The Bears put up 30 on this Lions defense, so I think the Packers should be able to score easily in this one. Enter Jalen Hurts for the Eagles, who are 8-point underdogs against the Saints at home. I like the Eagles +8. I think the Eagles get a shot in the arm with Jalen Hurts. They won't win, but I like their chances a lot better with some new life from Jalen Hurts. You got a game of the Choke Bowl between two franchises that historically have been great at finding ways to lose games, between the Falcons and Chargers. The Chargers are 3-point dogs at home. I'll take the Falcons in this one. Lay the 3 points for me. Washington football team at the San Francisco 49ers. San Francisco is a 3-point favorite in Arizona. I like Washington. I think they're a pretty solid team. And the Niners just have issues on issues. They've been competitive this year, but I think Washington has finally got things turned around here. I think that they'll win outright in this one. Monday Night Football, Ravens at Browns. This is a huge potential statement game for the Browns, who are 3-point underdogs at home. They've played, they had a huge statement win last week against the Titans. That's great. I'm not quite a believer in them yet. Beating Baltimore would be a huge step that would make me probably a believer in them. The Browns have done a lot of their damage against bad defenses, and they have played in a lot of bad weather games. But playing the Baltimore Ravens, a team that they lost to 38-6 this year, I mean, think about all the good defenses the Browns have played this year. They lost 3 games, one to a defense that isn't good in the Raiders, but that was a bad weather game, so you can't take a ton from that. Then they played 3 tough defenses in the Colts, which they were able to win because Phillip Rivers turns into a pumpkin outside. They played the Steelers and the Ravens and got outscored. 78-13 in those 2 games, but those games were a while ago. So I'll have my eyes on this one. This will be a really intriguing game, but I like the Ravens ultimately to lay the 3 points. Until the Browns win, I won't believe they will against these teams. Not just yet, anyways. All right, so Steelers, Bills. The 2 guys I'm looking at in this one are wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster, who has basically been an extension of the running game. He's been running routes that a running back runs. I mean, all of his routes have been very short. I want to see him open it up a little bit, get deeper down the field. I think this could be a big game for him. And on the other side, I emphasize shutting down a guy like Stephon Diggs. I'd imagine it's going to be a guy such as Steven Nelson trying to lock him down. He's coming back after being injured last week. I'm going to have my eyes on him in this one. My bold predictions for this one, I think the Steelers are going to have a total of 8 explosive plays, or like 6 explosive plays. 2 of them are double explosive. I think this could be a huge game for the Steelers offense. I think that they could have an opportunity to put up a ton of points in this one, and I think that they will. I think a big part of that's going to be Juju Smith-Schuster, who will record his first 100-yard receiving game of the season, and is going to have a double explosive play touchdown to boot. And last but not least, I'll have the Steelers holding Stephon Diggs to just 70 yards with no explosive plays. So I've kind of summed it up. I like the Steelers better in this game more than I think most do. I think that their play of late is not necessarily indicative of the way that they will play in this one. And even though it's a big game, I like the Steelers in this one. I think the Bills will play well, but I think it's just a matter of a great organization bouncing back. And I'm not saying the Bills aren't, or at least they're not heading in that direction. But I think that these are the types of games that great organizations like the Pittsburgh Steelers tend to win more than they lose. And, the Bills, they did win on primetime last week, but I'm not all that convinced because of the 49ers and the state they're in, playing home games in a different facility and out of their state and with all the injuries, show me that you can do it again, and I will definitely be believers in them at that point. But until then, I have the Steelers winning by a final score of 34-23. So I like the Steelers +2. That's the line right now. I'll take the Steelers in this one. Probably the biggest difference between my prediction and Austin's prediction that we've had probably all year and maybe even longer than that. So without further ado, hope everyone enjoys Sunday's game. And until next time, thank you for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with Austin and John.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.